We turn now to a different category of differences among engineers in the United States today, and a different source of differences. We have surveyed differences around the world by exploring reform movements. We have examined some sources of conflict currently among engineers in the United States. We now turn to history. We take a look, a brief look, an overly brief look, at the history of engineering. We're taking an unusual approach to the study of history, however. We're not going to be following history as a sequence of events, a sequence of people, a sequence of activities, or what some people call history as one damn thing after another. Rather, our approach to history is as archaeology, a history as excavation. We're going to go back and dig. We're going to dig into history. And our goal in digging back into history is to identify activities, phenomena, changes, the introduction of new categories particularly, that help us understand points of emergence of differences that live today. In other words, our goal is to attempt to understand some more dimensions of difference that live among engineers today through excavation, historical excavation. Now, one important dimension of differences that live among engineers and has lived among engineers throughout the 20th century is between those who work in the arena of design or categorize themselves as working in the arena of design, and those who work or are categorized as working in the arena of manufacturing. The separation, the distinction, and indeed the enormous gap between design and manufacturing in the United States has been notorious. From our point of view, it's important because it is a kind of difference among engineers that engineers understand, and they also understand that there's value on both sides. This is a place where dividing the world into two parts, the rational and the non-rational, or the rational and the emotional, doesn't seem to work. Now, if you live on the side of design, quite possibly you judge all those people in manufacturing as somehow crazy. And if you live on the side of manufacturing, quite possibly you judge all those people on the side of design as arrogant. But you probably also have some sort of a sense, one gains a sense that they know something over there, and they may know something that I don't know. A common phrase that's used to describe the relationship between design and manufacturing in the United States is throw it over the wall. In other words, designers, trained as designers, working in design activities, come up with these great new ideas. They think that they'll be wonderful and they'll work, though of course they'll work. But they traditionally may not have been thinking through the manufacturing dimensions or the manufacturing implications. So what they do is throw it over the wall to manufacturing and say, okay, manufacturing, build this, make it, it's going to work. So for a long time throughout in the history of industry in the United States, particularly in corporate industry in the United States and production-based industry in the United States, design and manufacturing have sometimes lived in different worlds with gaps between them. If you've had any experience on the job, perhaps as a co-op student, perhaps in a summer job, maybe you ran across some indicators of such differences. If you have, think about what those might be. What are for you, were the key markers of difference? If you haven't, go talk to somebody and ask them. Ask engineers. Are there any differences between design and manufacturing in the United States? In my case, I encountered this difference very dramatic differences very early on in my career. For example, I had a summer job at Eastman Kodak. Eastman Kodak invited engineers in for the summer after the junior year of school in order to get a feel for what it would be like to work at the company and give them the opportunity to check you out before interviewing and perhaps offering people jobs. And I worked in Kodak Park in Rochester, New York, building 7, I believe, area 6, 5th or 6th floor. I walked into a room that had about 300 drawing boards in it. And there, working at those 300 drawing boards, were lots of engineers, all wearing shirts and ties, all male. And down below, down on the 1st floor, was a production facility. Very different sorts of people down there. Still men, but working with no ties, older clothes, working very closely with tradesmen and very close to the machinery. Upstairs it was air conditioned. Down below it was not air conditioned, and upstairs it was quiet, extremely quiet. Indeed, for me, too quiet. Downstairs in production, it was noisy as can be. And it was symbolically significant that in going into the design arena, you took the elevator up. To go into production, you took the elevator down. Similarly, I had another job, a summer job, working for a glass company in Pittsburgh called Glenshaw Glass. Indeed, I was getting ready to go off into graduate school in anthropology, and I had a summer on my hands. I already had an engineering degree in my pocket, but I was unable or I was unwilling to try and go find a quasi-permanent job as an engineer and then leave after 3 months, even though I know I could have found one. Instead, I went into this company because they were just coming off a strike. The union had been on strike for about 3 months, and I went in and applied for a job as a laborer packing bottles into boxes. And I sat there in the front office for nearly an hour as lots of people came in, filled out applications, and went on through and had interviews and sometimes even left. And I'm still sitting there, until finally this man walks out with a white shirt and a tie and says, "Mr. Downey, could you come on back here?" And he took me back into the deep recesses of the building, which turned out to be where engineering design was. Sat me down in his office and he says, "Is it true what it says here? Do you have this engineering degree? Do you have this engineering experience? Do you have this grade point average? Is all this true? Well, and you're looking for a job as a laborer? What's going on here?" And I explained to him a little bit about my career plans. I was going on to graduate school. Well, he couldn't understand why I would ever want to go off into graduate school in anthropology, but he said, "You know what? We have a serious need for engineers here. How about instead of working as a laborer, you work as an engineer?" So I went down with the intention of a $5 an hour job as a laborer and came out with about a $10 an hour job as an engineer. And the next day I had on a tie, working inside this air-conditioned building and supervising the design and later the construction of air pollution equipment onto dustbins for the raw materials for the making of glass. And there I experienced dramatically the strong separation between the people, the higher class people who worked in design and the lower class who worked in production. Now, in the wake of the rise of the logic of competitiveness, and in the wake of the restructuring of corporations in the late 1980s and into the 90s, whereby we were reorganizing people increasingly around production processes, hopefully you remember some of this discussion, you'll find that the separation between design and manufacturing is shifting, changing, and in some industries, especially high technologies, you don't see it much at all. And indeed, your own experience on the job may have been that this was not a terrific source of difference. But there are others. So perhaps going through this exercise and to explore the distinction between design and manufacturing might help you identify other distinctions. I remember when I was conducting some research for a book, I spent some time visiting AutoCAD. And AutoCAD is as you well know, those of you who have gone through an engineering fundamentals type introduction, AutoCAD is a design program, a drafting program for engineers. And I was kind of curious to see what production meant at AutoCAD. I was being given an interview, or rather a tour, through the AutoCAD facilities by a public relations person. We're driving around to different parts of the facility, And we keep going from cubicle to cubicle, looking at people working on different parts of the software. And I said, well, what about production? What about manufacturing? Where's manufacturing? So he said, oh, you want to see manufacturing? Let's go. So we drive about 5 or 6 miles from where we were, stop by this small building, go on in, and what we see is a room about 40 feet by 60 feet, which was basically a floppy disk duplication facility. Production for in a software business was nothing but the duplication of disks. So your experience might be such that the distinction between design and manufacturing has been displaced by something else. Nonetheless, the distinction lives in production facilities. The main point in this little exercise that we're now going through is to help you understand the emergence, or our main goal is to help you understand the emergence of this distinction between design and manufacturing, particularly by gaining appreciation for what design came to mean. Design came to be identified with science. It came to be identified with new knowledge. It came to be identified, design came to be identified with acts of creation, with light bulbs, with the lighting up of new ideas. In other words, design became associated with godlike activities of creation.